Security stopped Keanu Reeves at the entrance of a private luxury event, and turned him away like a stranger. No one inside knew what had just happened, until minutes later, the truth exploded, and what Keanu Reeves did next completely shocked everyone in the room. At exactly 7:45 p.m., under a sky painted in deep gold and fading blue, a moment unfolded outside one of the most exclusive events in the city, a moment no one inside would ever forget. Luxury cars lined the street like a parade of power, cameras flashed, voices overlapped, and laughter echoed beneath towering glass walls as the elite stepped out in designer suits and flowing gowns. Every detail screamed perfection, every entrance a statement. Then, a quiet interruption arrived. A dusty, old pickup truck rolled slowly toward the entrance, clearly out of place. The engine made a soft, tired sound as it stopped near the velvet rope, drawing confused glances rather than admiration. The driver's door opened, and a man stepped out, calm, simple, almost invisible. No designer label, no expensive watch, just a black suit slightly worn at the edges and a presence that didn't demand attention but somehow held it. It was Keanu Reeves, though no one seemed to notice. He closed the door gently, looked once at the glowing building, and walked forward with steady, unhurried steps while inside the music pulsed, glasses clinked, and deals were made. At the entrance, a security guard stopped him and asked for an invitation in a firm but not rude tone. Keanu paused, looked at him calmly, and said quietly that he should be on the list. The guard checked but found nothing, and as another luxury guest was instantly welcomed beside them, the contrast became obvious. The guard told him it was a private event and asked him to step aside. Keanu didn't argue, he simply accepted it and stepped back, saying, "All right," before turning away. Outside, a young waitress watching from the side felt something familiar about him but couldn't place it, while inside the event continued uninterrupted. Keanu moved to the sidewalk, stopped in the shadows, and looked back at the building and its glowing perfection without anger or frustration, only quiet thought. Then he took out his phone and made a short call, calmly saying he was outside and had been denied entry. The voice on the other end reacted immediately and told him not to move. He ended the call and waited silently. Across the street, the waitress looked again, this time recognizing him, confusion filling her face as she wondered why someone like him would be standing outside alone. Inside, the event reached its peak as the host stepped on stage and began speaking about impact and change, but suddenly the lights flickered, the music cut, and the microphone died mid-sentence. Guests froze in confusion as the massive screen behind the stage suddenly turned on, showing grainy black and white security footage of the entrance, the velvet rope, the guards, and a man in a simple black suit being stopped at the door. The room fell into complete silence as everyone watched what had just happened without understanding its meaning, while outside in the dark, Keanu Reeves still stood quietly, waiting. Inside the grand hall, the silence that fell was not the kind of quiet people were used to at formal events. It wasn't polite or controlled, it was heavy, confused, and deeply uncomfortable. Every eye stayed fixed on the massive screen as the security footage continued to play, showing the entrance, the velvet rope, the guard standing firm, and the man calmly being turned away without hesitation. A wave of whispers slowly spread through the crowd as people tried to understand what they were seeing, questioning whether it was part of the program or something that had gone wrong. The host stood frozen on stage, his forced smile gone, while the technical team frantically tried to figure out what was happening, insisting the system wasn't under their control. The footage replayed in slower motion, zooming in on the man's calm posture and respectful behavior, and that's when recognition began to spread across the room. It didn't happen instantly, but like a wave moving from table to table, people slowly realized who he was, Keanu Reeves. The name didn't explode loudly, it sank into the room with weight and disbelief. Expressions changed immediately as shock replaced curiosity, because it was no longer just a stranger being denied entry, it was someone widely respected, someone who didn't need validation, yet had still been stopped and dismissed. The footage ended, but the silence remained, thick and unsettling. The host tried to regain control, nervously suggesting it was a technical issue, but before he could continue, the screen switched again, this time showing a live feed from outside. The angle shifted until it revealed Keanu standing across the street, calm and still, as if he had been there the entire time waiting without urgency or anger. Inside the hall, the guests leaned forward instinctively, realizing the distance between inside and outside suddenly felt non-existent. An event organizer rushed to the host and revealed the truth in a shaken voice, that Keanu was not just a guest but the primary reason the event existed financially. The host froze in disbelief, slowly turning his gaze back toward the screen, now seeing the situation in a completely different light. Meanwhile, outside, Keanu remained calm as a young waitress approached him cautiously, apologizing after recognizing him, and he responded gently, without frustration or bitterness. Inside, panic began to quietly build as staff realized the seriousness of the mistake, while security guards and managers exchanged tense, uncomfortable looks, understanding too late what they had done. The atmosphere inside shifted from confusion to guilt, as everyone replayed the moment of judgment and realized how quickly assumptions had been made. The host stood at the microphone without words, unable to fix what had already unfolded in front of everyone. Then, slowly, the main doors at the back of the hall opened, and all eyes turned instantly toward them. Keanu Reeves walked in. The same simple suit, the same calm expression, but now with complete recognition from every person in the room. No whispers followed this time, only silence, deeper and heavier than before. The host stepped forward to speak but was gently stopped by Keanu's raised hand, not in rejection but in quiet control. He spoke softly, saying he was okay, and those simple words carried through the room more strongly than any announcement could. As he walked further inside, he didn't look angry or superior. Instead, he observed the room with quiet awareness, sensing the embarrassment, shock, and realization settling over everyone. When he turned toward the stage, he paused, not out of hesitation, but because the moment was no longer about correction or blame, it was about understanding, and everyone there was about to feel the weight of that realization. The silence inside the hall was no longer just shock, it had deepened into something heavier, almost reflective. Every person remained still as Keanu Reeves walked further into the room, his footsteps soft against the polished floor, yet carrying a weight that felt louder than anything that had happened all night. There was no music, no chatter, no distraction, only his presence filling the space. The host stood a few steps away, visibly unsettled, unsure whether to speak or step aside, realizing for the first time that control of the event had completely slipped from him. Keanu reached the center of the room and paused. He didn't rush toward the stage or demand attention. Instead, he simply looked around at the guests, organizers, and faces that had moments ago been celebrating without hesitation. Now those same faces showed discomfort, some looking down, some avoiding eye contact, and others staring at him, waiting for anger, confrontation, or some dramatic reaction. But what came instead was none of those things. Keanu stepped onto the stage slowly and took the microphone gently, not with force but with calm intention. He adjusted it slightly, looked at the audience, and simply said, "Good evening," in a steady, unshaken voice that carried no frustration or ego, only honesty. He continued by saying something important had happened that night, not only outside the doors but inside the room as well, and explained that he wasn't upset about being stopped because he understood how quickly decisions are made and how appearances can influence judgment. His tone remained calm and reflective as he acknowledged that the security guards were only doing what they believed was right, which surprised many in the room and shifted the energy from tension to uncertainty. As he continued, he pointed out that people often decide who someone is before they truly know them, and that realization settled heavily over the audience as many began silently reflecting on their own behavior and deeply impactful, and the room remained completely silent as everyone listened, fully drawn in by the sincerity of his message. He added that respect matters more than anything else and that it is often the one thing people forget when making quick judgments about others. As he spoke, the atmosphere shifted from discomfort to awareness, as if the entire room was looking at itself through a mirror for the first time. He clarified that he wasn't there to embarrass anyone or create conflict, but moments like these reveal important truths that people often overlook in their daily lives. When he finished speaking, he stepped back from the microphone, leaving a heavy silence behind, not empty, but full of meaning. After a brief pause, someone in the audience began to clap, followed by another, until the entire hall erupted into applause, not of celebration, but of respect and realization. The host stepped forward, now more composed but visibly emotional, thanking Keanu for reminding everyone of the true purpose behind the gathering. Keanu simply nodded in response, offering no dramatic gesture, only quiet presence. Yet even as the room began to shift, the two security guards still stood frozen near the entrance, fully aware that the moment they had been part of had changed everything, and what would happen next was something no one in the room was ready to forget. The applause slowly faded, but the feeling it left behind didn't disappear. It lingered in the air, heavy and reflective, as if everyone in the room was now thinking about themselves rather than the moment they had just witnessed. People weren't clapping for entertainment anymore. They were reacting to realization. Yet even as the energy settled, something still felt unfinished. Look. Around them, a few guests glanced over and whispered quietly, not loudly enough to cause attention, but enough to make the air heavier. Everyone understood what had happened, and that silence carried more weight than any words could. On stage, Keanu stood for a moment after the applause ended, then without announcing anything, he stepped down and began walking, not toward the exit as some expected, but toward the entrance where the guards stood. The room shifted immediately, attention following him as whispers stopped and heads turned. The guards noticed him approaching and visibly tensed, one trying to speak but failing to find words, because in moments like this, apologies feel too small and explanations feel too late. Keanu kept walking steadily until he stood directly in front of them, close enough that there was no distance left between them, no stage or audience, just three people facing a quiet, defining moment. One guard tried to speak, starting with a hesitant, "Sir, but Keanu gently raised his hand, not to silence him harshly, but to stop him from struggling unnecessarily, and calmly said, "It's okay." Those two words carried more meaning than before, shifting from simple reassurance to genuine acceptance. The guard looked confused, as if forgiveness without punishment was something difficult to process. Keanu looked at both of them with calm understanding rather than judgment, acknowledging that they were simply doing their job. One of the guards admitted quietly that they didn't recognize him, and Keanu responded with a simple, "I know," without sarcasm or distance, just acceptance. For a moment, no one spoke. Difficulty of their role. He paused briefly before offering a gentle instruction, that next time, they should take one more second, one more look, one more question before deciding. The simplicity of the advice landed deeply, shifting the moment from guilt to understanding. One of the guards nodded and quietly promised to remember it, and Keanu responded with a small, calm smile that showed belief rather than superiority. Then, unexpectedly, he extended his hand. The guards hesitated for a moment, surprised, before shaking it with respect and disbelief, realizing how rare the moment truly was. Around them, the audience watched in complete silence, understanding that what they were witnessing wasn't about status or correction, but about grace and human connection. After the handshake, Keanu stepped back slightly, gave them a quiet wish for a good night, and turned away without dragging the moment further. The guards stood a little straighter afterward, not out of fear, but out of respect and reflection, as the lesson settled into them more deeply than any reprimand could have. Inside the hall, the atmosphere had fully changed, no longer just an elite gathering but something more meaningful and human. As Keanu turned back toward the room, no one saw him the same way anymore, not as a celebrity or figure of influence, but as someone who had chosen kindness over ego in a moment where he easily could have chosen otherwise, and the night was far from over, because what would happen next was already beginning to spread beyond those walls. As Keanu Reeves turned away from the entrance and walked back into the hall, something invisible seemed to follow him, momentum. It wasn't loud or chaotic, but it was undeniably powerful. Because what had just happened at the door didn't stay there. It began to spread. At first, it was subtle. A few guests near the front who had witnessed the entire exchange quietly pulled out their phones, hesitating for a second before pressing record, not for attention, but because they felt they were seeing something meaningful unfold in real time. Within seconds, more phones were raised, and the moment began to travel beyond those who had directly seen it. Inside the hall, conversations didn't return to normal. Instead of laughter or casual networking, small groups formed, speaking in low, thoughtful tones about what they had just witnessed, how he didn't blame the guards, how he chose understanding over confrontation, how differently most people would have reacted. The atmosphere had shifted completely. The event was no longer just a formal gathering but something closer to a shared story unfolding in real time. Outside the walls of the venue, that story was already beginning to grow. A media assistant quickly uploaded a short, unedited clip showing Keanu at the entrance, the conversation with the guards, and the handshake that followed, captioning it simply, "This just happened." Within minutes, the clip started circulating online. At first, it moved slowly, then rapidly as more people engaged with it, not because it was dramatic, but because it felt real. Inside, the host returned to the stage, attempting to regain structure, but even he recognized that the night had changed beyond his control. He acknowledged that something far more valuable than the planned program had already occurred, and the audience responded with quiet agreement. Keanu, meanwhile, sat among the guests rather than at the front or in any place of prominence, blending in naturally despite being the center of attention in a different way. The program continued with speeches and presentations, but everything now felt different, as if every word was being measured against what had already happened, and most of it no longer carried the same weight. Online, the clip continued to spread rapidly, reaching tens of thousands, then hundreds of thousands of viewers, with comments praising humility, kindness, and restraint, highlighting how rare it was to see power met with understanding instead of anger. Back at the event, even the security guards who had been involved stood differently now, not in fear or embarrassment, but in quiet reflection, acknowledging the moment and what it revealed about judgment and awareness. Conversations throughout the hall shifted entirely away from business or status and toward the meaning of what they had just seen, with people discussing how easily situations can be misunderstood and how quickly assumptions are made. Outside, a growing crowd began to gather, some having seen the clip online, others hearing about it secondhand, drawn not to controversy but to something unexpectedly human. As the night began to wind down, Keanu stood quietly and prepared to leave without ceremony or announcement. People naturally stepped aside as he walked, not because they were instructed to, but because respect had become instinctive in that space. When he reached the entrance again, the same guards who had stopped him earlier now greeted him differently, offering a quiet good night with full awareness of what had changed. Keanu responded simply and calmly before stepping outside into the night air. But while the moment inside had ended, its impact had not. The story was already moving far beyond the building, spreading across screens and conversations, and what began as a private misunderstanding was now becoming something much larger, with its final meaning still unfolding. The night outside felt different now, cooler, quieter, but filled with a new kind of meaning that hadn't been there before. As Keanu Reeves stepped beyond the entrance, the soft glow of streetlights replaced the bright, controlled luxury of the event behind him, and although the noise had faded, the impact of what had just happened was only beginning to grow. Across the street, a small crowd had gathered, not loud or chaotic, but quietly observing, many holding phones yet not rushing forward. It wasn't the usual attention he might have expected. There were no screams or pushing, only a calm sense of respect because many of them had already seen the video, and what mattered most wasn't just recognition of the person, but recognition of the moment itself. Keanu paused briefly on the sidewalk, taking it all in with the same calm presence he had carried throughout the night, when a young man hesitantly stepped forward and told him he had seen what happened inside and found it powerful. Keanu simply nodded and thanked him softly, not trying to claim the moment or elevate it, but allowing it to remain what it was, real. A woman nearby added that most people wouldn't have responded the way he did, and Keanu, after a brief pause, calmly replied, maybe they would, once again shifting attention away from himself and toward a broader reflection of human behavior. A black car pulled up quietly to the curb, its driver stepping out to open the door without fanfare, while Keanu glanced back once toward the glowing building where everything had changed forever. He could still feel the shift inside, not because of status or drama, but because of understanding, and that alone seemed enough. As he moved toward the car, the young waitress from earlier stepped out quickly but stopped herself from rushing too far, calling out gently to say he had changed something that night, not only inside the event but beyond it as well. Keanu asked softly if he really had, and she responded with certainty that he had affected more than just one room, placing her hand over her chest as she spoke. After a brief moment of silence, Keanu gave a small, genuine smile and simply said, "That's good," not out of pride but quiet acceptance, as if that was always the purpose, not the moment itself, but what it leaves behind. He stepped into the car, the door closing softly, and as the engine started and the vehicle pulled away, the crowd didn't follow or shout. They simply watched in silence, because some moments don't need noise to be remembered. Inside the event hall, things were also coming to an end, but everything felt different now, as guests left not with excitement but with reflection, carrying thoughts instead of impressions. The host admitted quietly that he had never seen anything like this in hundreds of events, and the organizers agreed that nothing about it had been planned, which was exactly why it mattered. Near the entrance, the security guards remained in position, but something inside them had shifted, not their roles, but their awareness, and they quietly acknowledged they would not forget what had happened. Outside, the video continued to spread rapidly across platforms, reaching millions and sparking conversations about judgment, kindness, and second chances, with people sharing their own experiences and reflections. Slowly, without announcement or coordination, something subtle began to change in the way people thought and reacted in everyday life, as they paused a little longer before judging and considered a little more before deciding. Meanwhile, Keanu sat in the back of the car in silence, watching the city pass by through the window, untouched by the attention surrounding him, because for him it was never about being seen, it was about what people saw in themselves afterward. As the streetlights moved across the glass and the night continued to unfold, the story didn't end there. It simply settled into something quieter, becoming less about a moment and more about a lasting reminder that respect is not defined by status, but by choice, and sometimes all it takes to change everything is one extra second.